Okay, so we're recording. Okay. So, Christopher, tell us what's going on real quickly. I know you got to go. What's going on in the world of politics,
Mhm.
legislative session, and elections?
Well, as I wrote a column that is still standing for the Louisiana Weekly last week, and called it a curious game of chicken going on over the budget. And that hasn't changed much. Basically, the move by the House Appropriations Committee that went to the floor was to save TOPS at the expense of defunding pretty much most of our hospitals. The actual modified bill went down to 80%, funding 80% of the TOPS bill. And the Senate currently is looking at the budget they got from the House and saying, we're not going to touch this. We're not going to try to vote on it, amend it. We're pushing for a special session. The problem is, in order to get along with that, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Taylor Barra, has got to actually agree. He's got to agree to move sine die, the ending early of the legislative session before its June 4th date, and go into so the governor could call a special session before the June 30th deadline, where all the budget ceases to exist in Louisiana. Well, Taylor Barra lately has been saying, no, I'm not doing that. This is playing chicken. They're daring the Senate not to pass their bill. The Senate, for the most part, is a little bit more fiscally liberal than the House. It's more get along. I mean, the joke in the Senate is any senator puts up a bill, it will be passed, even if it's trying to verify that there is no God, because senators have that courtesy and they expect the House to clean up their messes. They're not used to the House sending them what they conceive to be a mess, and they don't want to go through it. Right now, we're still at a $678 million deficit. The one thing that is going on that has gotten some play is a special fund. The TOPS Commission, to looking at TOPS, recommended a dedicated fund for TOPS that would take the $233 million of regular appropriation budget and $58 million of dedicated funds from various from the various constitutional interests and areas, and put it into a dedicated fund. Any money not used would be spent the next year. The idea that's going through the House is to pass that. And if the Senate enacts that, the Senate passes it through, it goes to the governor, then the House may be willing to go back and say, okay, we will push for a sales tax for just the TOPS program. There seems to be at least some support for that, but all of this will likely, the way it's heading, will likely be resolved in a special session, because short of a miracle right now, I do not see the Senate agreeing or to any particular measure. They can't pass a tax measure, so I don't think they're going to. The only thing the Senate would agree to is probably defunding TOPS and doing hospitals, which would put it directly in opposition to the House Republican leadership.
Okay, thank you so much. Elections coming up. Any big news that you know of?
Well, I mean, we've got a series of elections, of course, and what's going to be going on in Slide L, close race. Got a series of elections around the state. I would say nationally, and I'd love to get John Kuvian's viewpoint on this when he's ready, that the Arizona congressional race was very telling, very big. When you've got a district that Trump won by over 20 points and the Republican barely gets 5.5 points over the Democrat, 52-48, basically, and some change.
It was a 5-point race.
Yeah, it's a 5-point race. That means, Steve, there are 147 Republican-held seats in the United States that Trump won less decisively than he won the Arizona seat. Now, when you factor that there are 55 swing districts in the country, only 5 are held by Democrats. There are 27 seats that Hillary Clinton won that Republicans hold. I mean, if ever there was an indication of a blue wave, that's it. That's dangerous territory. That's territory which borders on saying goodbye to Jeff Flake's seat in Arizona. It's a gone pecan. That's saying that Heidi Heitkamp may have a shot in North Dakota. That's saying the Democrats may not just have a shot at the House, but the Senate. And John's a better pollster on that measure than I am. So.
Thank you, Christian. Yeah, what I like to do when we're talking about the discussion of 2018, I'm actually going to go outside of the box and not even talk about polling per se. I'm going to use other data points. More specifically, I'm interested in four things in terms of determining whether and or how big the wave will be. I personally think it'll be huge, as in 2006 and 2008 size huge. I'm more interested in looking at, number one, voter registration changes, number two, evidences of partisan enthusiasm from Democrats, number three, retirements, and number four, special elections. I'll start off with the easy one, voter registration change. Ironically, in this one data point, I don't see any discernible movement towards the Democrats since Donald Trump's inauguration. In fact, what has happened is that there's actually been more of a decrease in registered Democrats than registered Republicans in the states that have party registration, with independents picking up approximately 400,000 voters. Now, this is nationwide in the states that do have party registration. The 23 of them I was able to find on the web. That to me is telling that there's not necessarily enthusiasm for the Democrats per se, but that's the only positive data point I found for the Republicans. When I discuss the other three factors, they are bad, and I will unequivocally say bad for the Republicans because, number one, when you're talking about partisan enthusiasm, thus far we've only had two primaries, Texas and Illinois. In those two primaries, I'm a big fan of looking at party participation in primaries as kind of an evidence as to who's more jazzed and who is not in a midterm or a presidential election year. In Texas and Illinois, Democratic turnout relative to 2014 is up 118%. Republican turnout is only up 4% in those two states. And it's kind of a shame we're having this discussion now rather than in mid-May, because primary palooza does start on, I believe it's Tuesday, May 4th, when several states have primaries. And you have a series of primaries every week in May and June and August and September. Unfortunately, right now, we're kind of in a lull period. But just from those two states and from seeing a surge in Democratic turnout in Virginia and New Jersey last year relative to prior primaries, there's something brewing out there, and it's not good for the Republicans. So that's one factor that I'd like to discuss. The next factor, when we're talking about retirements, there is a record number of Republicans who are choosing to retire this year. The last time I saw a retirement count this bad for the Republicans, who, by the way, are 2 times more likely to retire than Democrats in the House, last time I saw the sheer volume of Republicans being this bad was in 2008. Which you remember, after a bad election cycle in 2006 and the prospect of Barack Obama winning heavily, a lot of Republicans decided it simply wasn't worth it. In other words, the psychology is, let's say you have a wave election and your party loses power, you're less likely to want to seek re-election in the next cycle once you have no more power, because you can't really get much done, especially in the House, where control by one vote means you have 100% of the power.
If I can throw something in, John, because because I have to head out.
Sure.
To give you an idea of how the psychology is manifesting on this, in a seat where there isn't a retirement, but a lot of people thought Dana Rohrabacher's seat in California, Congressman Rohrabacher is being one of his former aides and close political allies is running against him, and the Republicans are saying this is literally the buzz. Oh, we're going to end up, because they're 12, we're going to end up with 2 Republicans in the runoff, and so therefore we'll hold Dana Rohrabacher's seat. This is a 30-year incumbent. This is a guy who should be able to basically join the Communist Party and still get reelected in Orange County. And the fact of the matter is, he is the only way the Republicans are saying they could hold this seat. This was a seat Hillary Clinton won, but it's a historic Republican seat. I mean, this is Bob Dornan's seat at some level originally, is that by saying that they may be, through some trickery of an open primary like we have here in Louisiana and they have in Oregon, find a way to get 2 Republicans into that runoff, and then they'll have a Republican. That is an admission of trending defeat in the likes of which I have never seen out of the Republican campaign, the Republican National Congressional Committee. Never.
And the interesting dynamic that's going on in Dana Rohrabacher's seat is you're not talking about a Steve Scalise seat that's 3-1 Republican where you can afford to have multiple candidates running. You're talking about a 50-50 seat. And so if you're dreaming of multiple Democrats splitting up the vote evenly to where you have two Republicans slip in, that to me is a terrible way of planning a campaign. But I think a lot of Republicans in California are thinking that wrong-headed strategy because they genuinely are afraid of being shut out at the top of the ballot where you have a governor and Senate race going on, where you don't really have any Republicans catching fire. Therefore, the genuine fear is with two Democrats at the top of the ballot for governor and Senate, you may not have Republicans wanting to turn out in congressional race. I personally think that's a little bit too dramatic, but that is the perception out there in California. Just to use one example.
And we have actually seen in situations where there are multiple Republicans on a ballot here in Louisiana, not quite in the gubernatorial category, but where it has depressed Democratic turnout. So, I mean, this is not a light thing, but I just use it as an example. When you match that on the Pennsylvania seats that, frankly, the Republicans will lose at least 5 or 6 there, thanks to redistricting. When you're looking at the other seats, there is terror going on right now in the House. And frankly, that terror is spreading to the Senate. I got to tell you, by the way, I've decided that if Claire McCaskill, the senator from Missouri, plays the lottery, I want to know her numbers because the self-implosion in Missouri of the Republican Party is it looks like it's definitely going to deliver a seat to the Democrats that they shouldn't have. The governor locked in a scandal against the Republican nominee, who's the Attorney General, Josh Hawley, fighting back and forth. And if you start doing the math in each of these individual seats, Blankenship in West Virginia, where I don't think he's going to make the runoff, but just the very fact that Mitch McConnell had to buy ads to take out one of his Republican contenders, who's an ex-con, and he's because he was running in a couple polls even with the two front runners. It says that this is a weird and terrible season for the GOP. So anyway.
There are a couple stats I thought I would throw out there before Chris had to go, just to illustrate from my standpoint and going beyond polling about how bad things are this year. So I've been tracking candidate filings, which as of yesterday in Michigan became the 34th state to conclude candidate filing. According to my statistics here, 99% of Republican congressional candidates and 82% of Democratic congressional candidates have partisan opposition. What that means in plain terms is nearly every Republican, save about 2 of them, has a Democratic opponent to face in November, where approximately 20% of Democrats are going to have a free ride, which means that's money that does not have to be allocated, whereas for the Republicans, you got to spread it out to everybody. The other statistic I thought I'd mention, this is going along the lines of what Chris was saying regarding the how many seats are less Republican than Trump. I'm going to take it a step further. There are 42 seats where you have a Republican in a congressional district where Donald Trump got less than 50% of the vote. And in this straight party line voting where almost every Republican I've seen has run behind Donald Trump showing, that number alone should scare Republicans to death. If you are looking for Republican districts where the Trump percentage was not that particularly strong, the numbers are equally dire. More specifically, what I am seeing is, if you're looking, I'm seeing an average Republican drop from 4 to 9%, depending on the district. In other words, if Donald Trump got 58% and the Republican candidate is squeezing by with 50 in a special election, that's an 8-point drop. And I'm seeing enough of those to where I think there's a trend out there. Well, anyway, to get to the point of the matter here, if you're talking about Republican districts between 54 and 59% Trump, and including a couple districts in outstate Minnesota that fit that bill as well, you're talking about a potential net Republican loss of 85 to 137 seats.
Wow.
Now, I don't personally believe that every single one of those seats would flip, but the potential is there, number one, because when you're talking about even 42 Republican seats where Trump got less than 50% of the vote, Rohrabacher's being a perfect example of that. That's exhibit A of what the Republicans need to worry about. And what really needs to scare them, in my opinion, is that not one special election has been in territory where a Republican is representing a district that Hillary Clinton carried. In other words, if Ileana Ros-Lehtinen in Florida, just to use exhibit A here, were resigning and there were a special election, that seat would have a 99% chance of the Democrats picking it up in a special. As it is, they're probably going to pick it up in November because you're having Democrats united behind a Democratic candidate, but you're not seeing all the people who voted for Donald Trump necessarily voting for a Republican candidate. That, in a nutshell, is what the Republicans are facing this November.
And I'd add one last category to that before I go, where the real anxiety is also being manifested is the money game. Right now, the DCCC is leading the RNCC by almost $7 to $8 million in regular quarterly fundraising totals. And that's not including super PACs and so on and so forth. The enthusiasm amongst donors is with Democrats, both small donors and large donors. Republican donors are abandoning the House already, and they're getting nervous about the Senate. There's enough compelling evidence that they think they can save enough Senate seats that the Senate will stay in Republican hands. But even that, you're seeing the numbers start to go down. And when the money starts evaporating, and it will at the rate we're going, Republicans are going to find themselves with literally not enough money to defend seats that should be solid Republican seats. They shouldn't have to spend money in. And in the chase for Democratic seats that they're holding, frankly, these incumbents holding Hillary Clinton seats will be out of luck. It'll be an every man for himself, every woman for himself scenario.
Yeah. And final thought before Chris leaves. Ohio has a special election in August in a suburban Columbus seat that Trump carried 53-42. If I were the Republicans, I would be extremely nervous about that because that drop I'm telling you about regarding Republican performance vis-a-vis what Trump got last year, if now you as the president are getting 53% versus the 58% he got in that Arizona district, that 53% means a Democrat could theoretically pick that up. And that was actually John Kasich's seat years ago, believe it or not.
Okay, guys, listen, thank you so much.
Enough gloom and doom for a day.
Yeah, absolutely. So bear with me 1 second. Let me go ahead and stop the recording.